Hey there, thanks for joining me, Anna Fox with Equus Enlightened. And I thought this month I would go over last month's webinar in more detail and talk about the three things that you could do with or without your horse to keep making progress. And those were to stop stressing about losing ground, to work on your own riding, and to advance your horsemanship. So today we're going to talk about stressing about losing ground when your horse has time off. This causes people a lot of anxiety, whether it's a week or 2 weeks or 2 days off. People get really stressed out and they think, oh my gosh, my horse needs to be in this set conditioning program, needs to be worked X number of times a week for 45 minutes each time. And when that doesn't happen, it really causes people a lot of anxiety. So, the first thing I want to talk about is what do horses really need in terms of movement? And if we think about horses out in the wild or horses that are living in groups and turned out 24/7, usually they're grazing somewhere between 17 and 20 hours per day. And of course, with that grazing, they're foraging, they're looking for food and rooting through different types of things, not always just eating the grass that's right in front of them. So they are moving and their brains are also stimulated because they're looking for things to eat and for things to chew on. And a lot of times our horses in domestic environment don't get that. They're either stalled for a good portion of the day or they're in a small turnout where there's not a lot of stimulation. So, how can we make that better for our horses? Well, the first thing is forage, right? Everybody says, oh, you need to make sure your horse's diet consists mostly of forage, good quality forage. And that's really not the best advice because your horse does need to forage. But the term forage and the definition of foraging are different. So, forage is what we think of as hay or roughage that we feed our horses, right? But when horses are actually in the wild or in a situation where they're turned out all the time and they have multiple options for food sources, they forage, which means they look for different types of food and different things to chew on. So, how can we do that? One way of doing that is by giving your horse some slow feeder nets, right? Those have become pretty popular and they work great. There are some brands that, you just throw on the ground if your horses don't have any shoes on and they can pick at them and do whatever they want. And so that's a great way to get them that forage. Now, that being said, I would not recommend putting your high quality orchard alfalfa into these hay nets. You might want to put your high quality orchard alfalfa in a slow feeder net for sure. But do you want to put it out in the field to let your horse bang it around and all of that and eat on it for 16 hours out of the day? Probably not. Horses are actually designed to eat a sort of mid-quality average forage for those 17 to 20 hours that they're grazing. They're just eating a wide variety of plants, so they're getting nutrients that they aren't always getting in the domestic environment. So when I think about high quality forage or high quality hay, I think about a nice grass mix that doesn't have anything in it that you don't want your horse to eat, nothing that's gonna be poisonous, no briars, thistles, things like that that can cause problems. But I don't want it to be really rich hay because that's not great for their bodies to eat that all of the time. And also, they eat it too quickly. Now, if you're in a situation where your horse has really nice grass to eat um, most of the time, and hay is something that they get on a very limited basis, then sure, feed them that nice high quality hay. I have horses that get this sort of average quality hay 24/7. They always have access to it. They also have access to grass. And then they get nicer hay um, when their needs demand it. Or, I have a pony that had chronic laminitis when I got him. And so he gets a different type of hay because he needs something different. But for your most of your horses, just an average quality grass mix hay is totally fine. And there's nothing wrong with fescue. Oh my gosh. Unless you have breeding mares, um, there is nothing wrong with feeding your horses fescue hay. That is what they eat when they're out in the field. They eat fescue grass all the time. It's perfectly healthy, it's perfectly normal. So I'm get on my soapbox about that a little bit, but it's perfectly fine to feed your horses that, and usually it's less expensive than buying that really nice orchard alfalfa mix you can buy. Um, so the other thing is getting our horses enough movement, right? Because they need to move, and a lot of us don't have 100 acres of property and grass that we can turn them out on and just let them go to it. So how can we create an environment where they do move more? And one way is to separate your hay and feed sources. I really challenge people that when we're talking about building a place for your horse, think about it from your horse's perspective. Don't think about it from your own perspective. And goodness knows, I am a little bit lazy. I like to be efficient. So I don't want to have to go, you know, way far away to put hay out and then to another further away location to do some water. Um, but I also keep in mind that my horses need to move. And we also think, oh, well, it's convenient because, we would like our food and water to be right in the same place, right? Right in front of us on the dinner table and, not have to get up and go into the other room to get a drink. But for the horses, it's actually good for them to be able to move like that. And horses in the wild can go quite a long time without water. So, it's not unhealthy for them to have to walk to get to their water. Um, so if you're lucky enough, you have automatic waterers, they're out in the middle of the field somewhere. That's perfect, actually. Gives them that time to walk. But when you're developing, a very simple place and you're trying to think of different ways, separate your feed a little bit, separate their shelter a little bit, make everything so that it encourages your horse to move. And then you can also think about other ways to feed, slow feeder nets, or if your horses have shoes and hay nets don't work for you out in the field, hay huts are great, or, there's many different types of feeders. And if you've got the time and you've got the energy, you can also, make a hay trail in the mornings or at night or whenever it's convenient and let your horses sort of wander around there and eat that way. But really think about it from your horse's perspective and what your horse needs to be healthy. And that's movement. Movement is one of the big things that keeps horses healthy. So, in thinking about that, then what do they need as far as, our exercise goals? Well, most horses, unless you're competing at a pretty high level, are really perfectly fit to do the job as long as you're meeting those movement needs. Now, if your horse is standing in the stall for 20 hours out of the day, or even 12 hours, 8 hours out of the day, that's a big part of their movement needs that are not being met. So you have to think about that when you think about conditioning your horse. And it's really more in that aspect about getting the horse out and getting the horse moving than it is conditioning them for a certain competition or a certain discipline. Right now, my primary discipline is dressage. So, I think about most horses that are competing normally until about second level, they don't really need to be in a conditioning program, so to speak. If they get ridden, say, 4 times a week, and their movement needs are being met outside of that, they're perfectly fit to do the job. And having a day or two off extra is not going to do any damage. It's probably going to help a little bit. So, but when you start to move horses up in the competition world and they do start to need more strength, more endurance, maybe more speed, depending on your discipline, you do have to think about, how can I condition my horse? Well, obviously, the more they move, the better. So, the more things you can do at home to get them moving and to encourage that will help you. And the other thing is just long walks, long hacks. And I'm in a situation right now where I have to trailer out to do that. I don't have a lot of property, and there's not a lot of safe riding area around me. So I either have to cross the street and get permission to ride on people's land, or I need to trailer out. So I just have to plan that. That's something that you just have to take into account and plan for. The other thing is that some days we may just go walking around the property. I mean, there's enough room. We can go on a little walk around the property. I've got some hills, up and down the hills. We can do, leg yielding at the walk and do some, halt and walk transitions and maybe a little backups and just mix it up and do something different for that day. But walking is really a great way to condition a horse. And it's so easy to think, oh, I need to push, I need to push, I need to push, I need to push them past, you know, their current fitness level. Well, just think about what your goal is. If your goal is to jump up to the next level of competition pretty quickly, or meet a new speed goal, then yeah, you may have to at some point really push. But just for general fitness and to keep the horse ready to work, walking is a great way to do that. And then I start to think really about comparing a horse's fitness to human athlete fitness. That's really where my background was in college. My degree's in physical education, and I specialized in athletic training. So, endurance type things, again, long walks and throwing in maybe some short sessions of some trot and canter work while you're out there, and then walk and then do some more. And the duration of all that's really going to depend on what your goal is for endurance. Are you looking at going on a 100-mile endurance ride, or are you wanting to go preliminary level cross country? So they're totally different goals, and they're going to change your fitness plan a little bit. But think about, as you're developing that, think about and even study how do human athletes get fit, because you can draw a lot of parallels from that. When you're thinking about building strength in a horse, dressage comes to mind, because especially as you start to work on collection, that's one place where horses tend to be weak, is they're not strong enough in the joints and the muscles and the tendons that we're trying to activate to do the work that we want them to do. And then we ask too much, and they get sore, they get tired, they get frustrated because they can't take that level of work that many times, and then they don't want to do it. So when you're thinking about building a horse's strength like that, you want to think about really short bursts that you can repeat. You can repeat it several times, but always think about doing it in a really short burst. Um, something pretty simple, walk to canter transitions, for instance. I really want to make sure that my horse is understanding what they need to do to get their feet coordinated and boom, up into the canter. And that's all I'm going to ask for initially. As we're learning that, it's up into the canter and then you come right back down to the walk. Up into the canter and then right back down to the walk. And we might do that 10 times in a session, or maybe 3 or 5 or maybe 20, depends on the level of the horse's comfort. And that's something that you need to really tune into with your horse and learn to feel. You need to be able to say, oh, he did really try, but that was hard. Or, oh, he did really try, but he's getting a little tired, so maybe I need to shut it down with this one. And trust your instincts on that. Sometimes you hear trainers, and I'm guilty of this too. Let's just do it one more time. And sometimes that one more time is not good. And then you're stuck like, oh gosh, I don't want to end on a bad note, but I know this horse is maxed out. What do I do? So really tune into your horse. And I tell my students, if you think that that was your horse's best effort, you stop and you let both of us know that, hey, this was their best effort. It's not going to get better today. Stop right there. So that's really important when you're wanting to build strength. When you're wanting to build speed, you think along the same lines of strength, but you're just adding faster work for shorter bursts. So you go, you know, put that speed in there for a short period of time and then settle back. And, let's say if you're working on canter sets, and you go for a short gallop and then you bring it back. And then if you're doing a 5-minute canter set, you might do that for 30 seconds each minute the first time you do it. Um, and then you may start to extend it out to 1 minute and then canter normally for a minute and then back to a speed burst again. So, again, thinking about sprinters and how they train is very good. When I think about strength training, I think about power lifters and how do they train. Mm, that's a good, those are good comparisons if you're looking, to do some reading up on that. So now that we've talked about how can I build some conditioning into my horse and what do I really need to build in? Like, do you need to be worried about riding your horse for 45 minutes, 6 days a week? Probably not. And if your horse is in a situation where they're in the stall for the bulk of their time, or even I would say more than 4 to 6 hours a day, you probably need to do a lot more walking with your horse than you do. Like, you could take probably 2 of those 45-minute sessions and turn them just into long walks, and that would make your horse last longer. Your horse would be fit, your horse would be healthy, your horse would be happier. Um, and if you do a 3-hour trail ride, I mean, by all means, that's even better to get that horse out for that much time. But if it's only the 45 minutes that you have, not pounding on your horse for that 45 minutes will make a big difference in the long run. I just want people to keep that in mind because I see a lot of horses that are young and have issues and are retired very early. And, my horse, I have a horse that's 24 this year, and I don't compete him anymore, but he still does get ridden. He's sound. He could be ridden. I was teaching regular lessons on him up until this past winter, and now I just don't have anyone that needs his services right at the moment. So he's kind of living a life of luxury and getting ridden and playing with fun stuff when I have time. So, but the fact that he is that age, he competed up to fourth level dressage, and we didn't do a whole lot of dressage actually in our training, on a weekly basis when I think about it. Um, at that time, I was lucky. I lived at a cross country schooling facility, or he lived at the facility anyway, and so I had room to just be out in the field and play and jump if we wanted to, and and do all sorts of things like that, and take a couple serious lessons a month. And that really, really helped him um, build himself up. So really keep that in mind, that movement is the most important thing for your horse, not training per se. And when we think about movement, we also need to think about rest, because they do need rest. They're not moving constantly. And some of the research out there suggests that horses do need about 3 hours per day of REM sleep. And to get REM sleep, they do need to lay down, and either in that posture where they're sort of sitting up on their legs, but their chin is resting on the ground, or where they're laid flat out. So they need to have total support for their skeletal system while they're in REM sleep. And they tend to do it in short bursts, like 15 to 30 minutes. So your horse probably isn't going to lay down for 3 hours at a time. That wouldn't be very healthy for him anyway. But we do know that some horses lay down longer than others. And I think a lot of that has to do with their environment and how comfortable they are in it. For instance, a lot of domestic horses are sleep deprived because they're not comfortable in an active barn situation in a small box to lay down and sleep well. Now, we see horses that are perfectly comfortable and are laid out at horse shows and everything else. So they've really learned to adapt to their surroundings and are comfortable in that. And horses are adaptable like that. So it's an individual thing. But when I first got to a place where I could keep my horses out most of the time and sort of let them do whatever, I really started to notice when they sleep. And it's funny because it also changes with the season. Um, this time of year, as it's starting to get hot in Virginia, they sleep a lot more at night. I don't often see them laying down during the day, but in the winter, I would see them laying down during the day quite a bit. So it's interesting. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, are they actually sleeping? What's going on? Because I wasn't always seeing them, and they weren't always in their stalls. And I'd have to look, to see when they were sleeping. And if I would go out at night to check on somebody or check on something, I'd be like, oh, I think they're sleeping now. And so I started to sort of see what their patterns are. And we don't necessarily take our horse's sleep as seriously as we do our own. Horses need that. It's not something that, a lot of us are taught, oh, horses sleep standing up. They rest standing up. They can do that, yes, but they need to sleep. So keep that in mind. If you have a horse, especially that's in a boarding situation, or you're not sure, nobody ever says, oh, your horse is laying down, or you know are they getting that sleep? And really be proactive, and see if you can give them some ways to get enough rest, because we know in people, like, not resting is very stressful and can cause all kinds of stress ailments. So treat your horse like you would yourself in that respect. And the other thing I think people miss out on huge is rest while you're working your horse. A lot of people have this 45-minute mindset, at least in the dressage world. There's a lot of 45 minutes, and I'm going to start out with a little warm up, and then I'm going to do maybe a little collected work or whatever my horse is doing, and then I might do a little lateral work at the end. I'm going to kind of break this into a few sets, and I'm going to give them a walk in the middle. Okay, that's good. But if you're if you're just trying to sustain, and you're not teaching the horse anything new, and they're perfect already and there's nothing you need to change, then I think that theory works pretty well. But if you've got something that you're working on, if you're trying to straighten a horse or get a better connection into the bridle or a little more activity from behind, getting something that feels really good and then saying, oh my gosh, my horse, that was a big try, and letting them rest. Stand in the middle of the arena and let the horse rest. Because not only is it rest, it's also processing. It's just like a human when you're learning something, sometimes you need to just sit there and zone out and process the information that you learned. Horses are the same way. And it's very individual. Some horses need a second, some horses need 5 minutes. So that's something else that if you give your horse this opportunity to process this information and rest while they're actually in work, you'll start to see what what their habits are. Like, how long did it really take them to process that? You know, and some horses love to stand still and chew on it and think about it, and some horses need to move. So again, it's an individual thing, but do yourself a favor, do your horse a favor, and just play with it and see, what can I do to give my horse a little rest while we're working and really rejuvenate him. And it's, as you're conditioning and you're thinking about things like, especially building strength and building speed, being able to give the horse that rest of, let me kind of get my thoughts, my muscles, my physiology back working, and then go again, is huge. And a lot of us were taught, horses sleep standing up and they need to walk to cool out. Walking can be helpful when it's very hot and you need to keep air moving over the horse. And also, if they've worked hard and, you're worried about the muscles getting sore and bound up, and, you know, then walking is good. But for the average horse workout, standing still for 2, 5 minutes in the middle of it is not going to harm your horse in any way. And like I said, it's very likely to help, and it may help them process some information, feel better about themselves, and be like, oh, yeah, that was the right answer. And then that brings me to, well, if I feel like I need to ride my horse for 45 minutes, but I've been on him for 15 and he did this really amazing thing, can I stop? Yes, you could stop. Get off the horse, you know, give him the most love ever, get off and put him back into his happy place. So your horse only getting 15 minutes that day is not going to make that big of a difference. It actually will probably make a huge difference in their mental health and, how they processed whatever you were trying to teach them. But in their fitness, it's not going to make that big of a difference. And if you have a horse that is, you know, movement deprived, then end the session and go for a walk. Give them that movement time, or take them hand grazing, hand walk them. That's totally okay too. As long as they're moving. And I think that these are really things that have been made really hard in the current way that we keep domestic horses, and especially competition horses. And they don't need to be that hard. You can really make some very simple changes to make your horse's life better. And that's what I'm here to help you do. So, if you are thinking about these and you're like, man, maybe I could do this, or maybe my horse isn't getting enough movement, then feel free to reach out to me, send me a message, and let me know how you like the video, and if I can help you in any way. And until the next video, stay healthy and safe, everyone.